Mom said if you and your kids disappeared, our life would finally be perfect. My girlfriend just smiled and kept eating. I said nothing. I opened a spreadsheet called Financed.xlsx. 3 weeks later, I handed her a $43,680 bill in front of 25 guests. My name is Daryl. I'm a civil engineer. I have 2 kids, Eli, who's 15, and June, who's 12. Their mother and I divorced 3 years ago. It wasn't ugly. It was just done. We split custody evenly, stayed civil, and I rented a place close enough that the kids could reach either house without me having to drive them. I met Vanessa about 14 months after the divorce. She was direct, funny, didn't play games, or so I thought. She had a daughter named Sloan from a previous relationship. Sloan's father hadn't contributed financially in years. I knew that going in. I didn't think it was going to become my problem. 8 months into dating, we moved in together. I found a 3-bedroom house, signed the lease under my name, and told myself this was what building something looked like. I was the flexible one. That's how Vanessa described me early on, and I let it become my identity in the relationship. Flexible about the schedule, flexible about costs, flexible about whose family got the holidays and whose didn't. I thought it meant I was good at this. What I didn't see yet was that Vanessa wasn't describing a quality she appreciated. She was describing a limit she hadn't found. The financial side started the way these things do. Groceries when she was short. Her car registration 1 month. Then I was covering the full rent. I made more. It made sense, and then that just quietly became the arrangement without us ever actually agreeing to it. I added her as an authorized user on one of my cards for emergencies. Then on a second one. The emergencies became regular expenses, and the regular expenses became assumed. Then came Sloan's tutoring program. College prep, twice a week. $400 a month billed to my card. Vanessa mentioned it one evening, while she was already typing in my card number. "You're so flexible about this stuff," she said. "That's what I love about you." I said nothing. I was busy being flexible. What I didn't say, what I kept not saying, was that Eli had asked me that same week why Sloan got a tutor and he didn't. I told him things would even out. I believed it when I said it. That was my first mistake. Not the money. The belief. The Tuesday it happened, nobody was fighting. It was just dinner, pasta, 4 plates, the kind of ordinary evening you don't bother to remember. Sloan was talking about something from school. Eli was eating. June had her elbows on the table the way she always does when she's tired. Vanessa was half scrolling her phone, half present, the way she got on weeknights. Then Sloan set her fork down, looked across the table at me, and said it. "Mom told me that if you and your kids disappeared tomorrow, our life would finally be perfect." She giggled after. Bright, easy, like she'd just shared a funny observation about the weather. The table went silent. June stopped moving. Eli didn't look up. He just reached over, quietly, and set his fork down on the table. Not hard. Not a scene. The way you set something down when you've decided you're finished with it. I looked at Vanessa. She glanced up from her phone, looked at Sloan, and smiled small, quick, the reflex of a woman who recognized the joke because she'd made it first. Then she looked back down at her plate. "She's just joking," Vanessa said. That was it. No correction, no Sloan, that's not something we say. Nothing. 2 kids were sitting at that table who had just been told, in their own home, that the world would run better without them, and their mother's response was to twirl her pasta. Eli never picked his fork back up, I noticed. Vanessa didn't. That night, after the kids were in their rooms, I sat across from Vanessa and asked her very calmly what Sloan had meant by that. She set her glass down, tilted her head, and looked at me like I was being exhausting. "She's a kid," she said. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is." I didn't say anything back. I just sat there and thought about how quickly she'd had that answer ready. I gave it a day. I wanted to be fair to myself. Maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe it really was just a kid saying something careless at dinner. It wasn't. The next evening, I brought it up again, this time more directly. I told Vanessa that what Sloan said had landed hard on Eli and June, and that I needed her to address it, not a trial, just a simple correction. "We don't say things like that about people who live in our home." Vanessa put her coffee down. "Sloan is 13, she said. "She doesn't understand the weight of what she's saying. You're treating her like she planned this." I said the weight was the same regardless of intent. 2 kids heard it either way. "You always do this," she said. "You always make yourself the victim. You take one thing and you build a whole case out of it." I started to respond. She kept going. And what about how Sloan feels right now, knowing you're this upset with her? Do you understand what that does to a kid? I pointed out that I hadn't spoken to Sloan about it at all. Vanessa looked at me like that was beside the point. I can't believe you'd put me in this position over a joke, she said. I genuinely cannot believe this. I want you to understand what just happened in that conversation. I'd walked in asking for a simple acknowledgement that my children deserved better. I walked out somehow being the one who had caused a problem. That's a specific skill. I didn't fully appreciate it at the time. She used the word flexible on her way out of the room. Said I needed to be more flexible about how kids communicate. That I was rigid, oversensitive, assigning meaning where there wasn't any. I went to my home office and opened a blank spreadsheet. I didn't have a plan yet. I just started typing. 2 days later, Vanessa booked a weekend trip. Just her and Sloan girl time, she said. An Airbnb 2 hours away. She forwarded me the confirmation like I was her assistant. The charge cleared on my card that Thursday. $380. Eli and June were with me that same weekend. We ate sandwiches at home. Saturday afternoon, Eli came out of his room and handed me his phone without a word. Sloan had posted a photo to their group chat, her and Vanessa at a pool, laughing, Vanessa in what looked like a new swimsuit. He stood there while I looked at it. 15 years old, not saying anything, just watching my face to see if I was finally seeing what he'd already understood. I handed the phone back. He nodded once and went back to his room. That was the moment I stopped thinking of the spreadsheet as something I was doing to process my feelings. I started thinking of it as something I was going to use. I'd always known, roughly, that I was generous. I just had never looked at the total. The spreadsheet took about a week to build properly. I went back through 3 years of bank statements and credit card records and pulled every charge I could tie directly to Vanessa's household, not the agreed rent split, not shared groceries, not the utilities we both used. Just the extras. The things I'd covered because I was flexible. The number was $43,680. I named the file Financed.xlsx and I sat with that for a long time. Here's what made up the bulk of it. Sloan's college prep tutoring $400 a month for 24 months came to $9,600. 2 family vacations that included Vanessa's mother and her sister, $14,200. Her sister's car had needed repairs twice. I'd covered both, $4,100 total. One spring, Vanessa's mother needed dental work, $5,300. My card, because she didn't have coverage and I was, as Vanessa liked to say, flexible about these things. The rest was monthly household overrun, the gap between what we'd nominally agreed to split and what I'd actually been covering, month after month, because it was easier than having the conversation, $43,680. 3 years, 61 line items. My son didn't have a tutor. I printed 2 copies and locked them in my desk drawer. I didn't know the exact moment I'd use them. I just knew I would. What I was noticing, while the spreadsheet was taking shape, was that Eli and June had gotten very quiet. Not upset quiet, just smaller. Like they'd learned to take up less space. Eli had stopped eating dinner at the table most nights. He'd take his plate to his room without asking, and I hadn't pushed it because I was tired of manufacturing reasons for Vanessa to tell me I was being too rigid. June had stopped drawing on anything she was going to leave out in the open. She used to tape horses to the fridge, to her door, to the side of the bookshelf. She'd stopped months ago, and I hadn't registered exactly when. One evening, I walked past Eli's room and saw his dinner sitting on his desk, half-eaten, his fork resting across the plate. Same stillness. Different room. It landed the same way it had at the table. Then June said the thing I keep coming back to. I asked her, casually, why she hadn't put any drawings on the fridge lately. She shrugged and said, I didn't want to make Sloan mad. 12 years old. Self-editing her own artwork. In her own home, because she had already done the math. This wasn't her space to take up. I told her of course she could put them up. She nodded like she was being polite about it. She didn't put anything up. 2 days after that, she called where we lived, Sloan's house. Just in passing. She caught herself, corrected it, kept talking. She didn't think it was a big moment. It was the biggest moment in the whole 3 years. I closed the spreadsheet that night, went to the kitchen, and started making a list of who to invite to the housewarming. By the time I finished Financed.xlsx, it had 61 line items across 4 columns: date, description, amount, category. I'd gone back to the beginning, to the first month we'd moved in together, and worked forward. It took discipline to keep it clean. No commentary, no editorializing, just dates and numbers and what the money had gone toward. The largest single charge was $6,800. A beach vacation, October 2022. Vanessa, her mother, her sister, and Sloan, billed to my Visa. I remember that week because Eli and June were with their mother her rotation, and I told myself it made sense to go, that I was investing in something real. I hadn't registered that my children weren't included in what was being built. I printed 2 copies, 12 pages each. I held them for a moment, then put them in a folder and locked it in my desk drawer. I wrote one word on the folder tab, in pen, Financed. I spent 3 evenings after that checking things quietly. The lease, my name only. Signed before Vanessa, and I had even discussed cohabitation. Both bank accounts, mine, always had been. The authorized user terms on the 2 credit cards I'd added Vanessa and her sister to. Terminable at will, no notice required, 2 taps in the app, and those cards would stop working wherever they happened to be. Clean leverage. No lawyers needed. I'd built it over 3 years without meaning to. I just needed an occasion. And then Vanessa handed me one. She came home one evening with a notebook, actual paper, handwritten lists, and announced she'd been planning the housewarming. Catered trays, string lights in the backyard, a real party. She'd already drafted the guest list. Her mother, her sister's husband, her cousins, the neighbors she'd befriended. She presented it with the energy of someone showing you a finished project they're proud of. I counted the names. Her side, over 20. My side, 2 work colleagues and the neighbor to the left. "You're so easy to work with," she said, already moving toward the kitchen. "Honestly, that's your best quality." A few days later, she showed me a text she'd sent her sister. I still don't know why she showed me. Maybe she thought it was endearing. It said, "Daryl's flexible. He won't mind the extra guests." She held up the phone like she was sharing good news. I read it. Then I looked at her and said, "I used to be." She laughed. She thought I was being charming. That was the first time I'd said anything with an edge in 3 years, and she absorbed it as a joke because she had never once considered that I had a limit. That was useful information. She went back to her notebook. At some point that same evening, she mentioned, while reviewing the room layout, that she was thinking about where to move some furniture once. As she put it, the kids went back to their moms. She didn't specify which kids. She didn't need to. She was talking about a version of this house that didn't have Eli and June in it, and she said it out loud in the same tone she used to discuss throw pillow placement. I went to my desk. I unlocked the drawer. I looked at the folder, then at the banking app on my phone, then back at the folder. 25 people in a house I had financed in 3 weeks' time. That seemed like enough witnesses. The plan wasn't complicated. That was the part I kept coming back to. Throw the housewarming exactly as Vanessa had planned it. Let her invite her family, her neighbors, her 20-plus guests. Let her order the catered trays and set up the string lights and stand in the backyard of a house I had financed and play hostess for an entire evening. Let the room fill up with exactly the audience she'd chosen. Then, at the right moment, open the banking app and remove Vanessa and her sister as authorized users on both cards. 2 taps. No announcement. They'd find out the way people find out when the card stopped working. After that, when Vanessa came to me about it, and she would, I'd have the folder ready. I'd thought carefully about the alternative. The quiet exit had its own cost. If I left without saying anything, Vanessa would write the story herself. I was difficult, oversensitive, too rigid for a blended family. Sloan would face no consequences. My kids would grow up knowing that what happened at that dinner table was simply absorbed and forgotten. And the $43,000 would dissolve into the past like it had never existed. I wasn't willing to pay that price. Not for her comfort. The night before the party, I went to check on June. She was in bed, sketchbook on the nightstand, not quite asleep. I sat on the edge of her bed and asked if she was looking forward to tomorrow. She said, "Sure. Kind of." I looked over at the drawing folder on her desk, the closed one that had been sitting there for months, and asked her one more time, quietly, why she hadn't put anything on the fridge. She pulled her blanket up and said, "I didn't want to make Sloan mad." The first time she'd said that, I'd heard it as something sad. This time I heard it for what it actually was. My daughter had quietly concluded without a fight, without a word to me, the way kids absorb things they've decided are just true, that she had no claim to the surfaces of her own home. Not because anyone had told her so directly, because the environment had taught her. That was the moment I stopped asking myself whether I was doing the right thing. She had already answered that. I kissed her goodnight. I went to my office, unlocked the drawer, and took the folder out. I set it on top of the desk, opened the banking app, and checked that both authorized user accounts were still active. They were, for now. I turned off the light. Tomorrow, there would be 25 people in a house I had financed. String lights in the backyard, catered trays on the tables, and a folder with 61 line items sitting on my desk. I was done being flexible. The party looked exactly the way Vanessa had planned it. String lights across the backyard, catered trays on the folding tables, 25 people moving through the house and out onto the patio, her mother, her sister, her cousins, the neighbors she'd cultivated, people I'd never met. My 2 colleagues stood near the back fence with drinks. The neighbor from the left was there with his wife. Eli and June were in the yard. They'd positioned themselves near the back corner together, Eli with his hand loosely on June's shoulder, both of them present but not quite in it. They weren't miserable. They were just careful, the way they'd learned to be in spaces that hadn't fully decided to include them. Vanessa moved through it all like she'd been rehearsing for weeks, greeting people at the door, directing guests toward the food, gesturing around the backyard with the quiet pride of someone showing off something she'd built. She was wearing a new dress. I'd seen the charge earlier that week. The folder was on my desk inside. My phone was in my pocket. I was watching and waiting. About an hour in, Vanessa tapped her glass. The yard quieted. She smiled around at the group and said she had a few words. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about what it meant to have a real home, a stable place, somewhere her family could grow. She said our home 4 times. She said flexible twice, once about the layout, once about me, directly, by name, in front of everyone. I just want to thank Daryl, she said, raising her glass in my direction, for being so flexible with all of this, for never saying no. She paused, let the smile settle. To a man who never says no. 25 people raised their glasses. I raised mine, and I thought, tonight's the first time. I waited 20 minutes. Enough time for the room to resettle, for Vanessa to get comfortable inside a conversation, for the evening to feel like hers again. Then I stepped inside, stood in the kitchen, and opened the banking app. Vanessa removed as authorized user. Her sister removed as authorized user. 2 taps. 8:47 p.m. I screenshot the confirmation, pocketed my phone, went to my desk, and picked up the folder. Then I walked back out to the party. 7 minutes later, Vanessa's sister came back from a run to the corner store, her face carrying the particular confusion of a declined card. She found Vanessa near the food table and said something quietly. Vanessa's expression shifted. She scanned the yard, found me, and came over with a smile still working hard on her face. "Hey," she said quietly. "Did something happen with the card?" "I'm glad you brought that up," I said. "I've been wanting to talk about what I've financed." I held out one copy of the folder. She took it before she decided whether she wanted it. "What is this?" "It's a spreadsheet," I said. 61 line items. 3 years. I opened my copy and read from the summary line at the top, clearly enough for the people nearest us to hear without effort. $43,680. Not including rent. Not including utilities. The backyard went quiet in the way it does when people stop pretending not to listen. Vanessa's mother was standing 6 feet away. Her sister had drifted back over. I watched Vanessa's face cycle through confusion, then fury, then when she registered her mother's expression, something that looked briefly like shame before it hardened back into anger. I glanced toward the back corner of the yard. Eli had gone still. June was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before, not quite surprise. More like recognition. Like she'd been waiting to see if this moment was going to happen, and it was happening, and she was taking it in. "I can't believe you would do this here," Vanessa said, voice low and tight. "In front of my family. In front of all these people. You planned this party here," I said. "I just planned the rest of it." She stared at me. Then she looked down at the pages in her hand. Her sister's name was in 3 line items. Her mother's was in 2. She knew they were reading at the same moment she was. "This is humiliating," she said, louder now, the composure starting to separate from the performance. "You've humiliated me in my own home." "I read from a spreadsheet," I said. "One I named Financed. You can keep that copy." The yard was very quiet. Vanessa looked around at the faces her family, her neighbors, people she had chosen to be here, and for the first time that evening she didn't seem to know what to do with the room. My neighbor from the left put his drink down on the table next to me and didn't move away. He didn't say anything. He just stayed where he was. That was enough. Vanessa's mother was the first to leave. She didn't make a scene. She set her plate down, said something quietly to Vanessa's sister, and moved toward the gate. The sister followed. The cousins filtered out after, the way people leave when an event has clearly ended even if no one's announced it. Vanessa watched them go. Then she looked at me. "You embarrassed me in front of people I have to face again," she said. "Your family spent 3 years being very comfortable in my home," I said. "I think they'll manage." She went inside. I heard her in the bedroom. When she came back out, she had 2 overnight bags fuller than you'd pack for just one night. She took Sloane by the hand and walked out through the front without going through the backyard again. On the way past me, she said, "I'd regret this." I held the door. The people who stayed were quiet about it. My colleagues helped fold the tables. The neighbor from the left stayed until nearly 11, didn't ask me to explain anything, just stayed. His wife refilled the water pitcher. That was enough. I won't pretend it felt clean that night. It didn't. But somewhere around 2 in the morning, I landed on the thing that actually let me sleep. My kids would know I hadn't absorbed it quietly. Whatever came next, they would know that. The following Saturday, I made pasta. Just the 3 of us. Eli sat at the table. He picked up his fork and ate the whole meal without once getting up. After dinner, June came to me with a small stack of drawings. Horses, mostly. One was a house with 4 figures out front. She'd written home across the top in her 12-year-old handwriting. She asked if she could put them on the fridge. I said yes. She put up 7. I used to be flexible. Now I'm just certain.